We all believe in second chances. People can change. They can reform. But should a serial killer ever be given that chance? Jack Unterweger, a convicted murderer, walked free in 1990. He was praised as a success story, a reformed man who had turned his life around. He became a respected journalist, a celebrity mingling with Austria's elite, even helping the police investigate violent crimes. But a serial killer was on loose. Was he really reformed? Welcome back to Prison Stories. Today, we will discuss one of the most shocking cases of deception in criminal history. Jack Unterweger not only fooled the justice system, but tricked the world into believing he had changed. Yet, the havoc he caused made one thing clear. When it comes to serial killers, there are no second chances. It was 1974 when 18-year-old Margaret Schaefer accepted a ride from a man. What seemed like a harmless encounter turned into a nightmare when she was brutally strangled with her own bra and left in the woods. It didn't take long for police to start looking into a man with a violent past, Jack Unterweger. He was already known to authorities for theft, assault, and other petty crimes, making him an immediate person of interest. But what sealed his fate were the witnesses who placed him near the crime scene around the time of Margaret's disappearance. As investigators dug deeper, they noticed a pattern of escalating violence in his past. He had a history of attacking women, and the brutality of Margaret's murder suggested it was far from his first violent act. When police finally brought him in for questioning, Unterweger made a shocking statement. He admitted to the murder, but in a twisted way. He claimed that killing Margaret reminded him of his own mother, whom he resented. In 1976, he was sentenced to life in prison. But what no one could have predicted was that this wouldn't be the end of Jack Unterweger's story. It was just the beginning. Behind bars, Jack Unterweger didn't behave like a typical violent criminal. Instead, he reinvented himself. He became a writer, pouring his thoughts into poetry, short stories, and even an autobiographical novel titled Purgatory, a book that painted him as a deeply troubled man seeking redemption. His writing caught the attention of Austrian intellectuals, artists, and even politicians who saw him as proof that rehabilitation was possible. As the years passed, a movement began to grow, one that argued Unterweger had changed. Famous literary figures and even government officials rallied behind his cause, believing that his life sentence was unjust. They saw him as a reformed man who had been shaped by a tragic childhood, not a ruthless killer. By the late 1980s, the pressure to release him had reached its peak. Journalists, celebrities, and even members of the justice system pushed for his parole, convinced that keeping him locked up was a mistake. They believed in second chances. And in 1990, Jack Unterweger got his. What they didn't realize was that they had just set a serial killer loose. When Jack Unterweger walked out of prison in 1990, he wasn't just a free man, he was a celebrity. The very system that once locked him away now welcomed him with open arms. Intellectuals, journalists, and even politicians praised him as a success story, a man who had transformed from a convicted murderer into a respected writer. His autobiography, Purgatory, became a bestseller, and his poetry was widely published. His plays were even performed in theaters across Austria, further cementing his image as an artistic genius who had overcome his dark past. He gave interviews on television, where he spoke eloquently about crime, punishment, and rehabilitation. Ironically, the very things he was about to exploit. Unterweger was invited to literary events, panel discussions, and book signings, where he mingled with Austria's cultural elite. He was charming, intelligent, and persuasive. Instantly out of prison, he was given a platform. Newspapers hired him as a crime journalist, where he wrote articles about violent murders. At first, it seemed like Austria had been right to believe in Jack Unterweger's redemption. But then, something chilling began to unfold. In 1990, just months after his release, the bodies of sex workers started appearing across Austria. Their deaths were disturbingly similar. Strangled with their own bras, their bodies discarded like trash. Police were puzzled. The killings seemed methodical, controlled, as if the murderer had done this before. But there was no clear suspect. As the months passed, the murders didn't stop. They spread beyond Austria. In Czechoslovakia, Germany, and even the United States, sex workers were disappearing, only to be found later, murdered in the same brutal fashion. Meanwhile, Unterweger was traveling internationally as a journalist, reporting on crime, and even covering stories about the very murders he was committing. He attended crime scenes, interviewed police, and wrote about the dangers sex workers faced, while knowing full well who was responsible. Austrian police were quietly piecing together a disturbing pattern. They had noticed something strange. The murders had started almost immediately after his release. The victims were all sex workers, all strangled with their own bras, and all killed in eerily similar ways. The more they looked, the more they realized these murders mirrored the 1974 killing that had put him in prison in the first place. As he traveled across Europe, and even to Los Angeles, the Austrian police began investigating in secret. They took help from FBI, and they discovered the similarities between murders across Europe and even USA. They reviewed his movements, cross-referencing his trips with the locations of the murders. What they found was shocking. Everywhere Jack Unterweger went, bodies turned up. Investigators then turned to phone records, tracing calls Unterweger had made from his hotel rooms. In multiple cases, they discovered he had called sex workers just hours before their disappearances. Then came the biggest break, the distinctive knot used to strangle the victims. The way the bras were tied was identical across multiple crime scenes. Investigators realized this knot was unique, something a regular person wouldn't instinctively tie. And there was only one known person with a documented history of using the same technique, Jack Unterweger. By now, the evidence was overwhelming. The police had a clear picture. He had fooled the world, but the crime scenes didn't lie. It was time to bring him down. By 1992, Austrian police had gathered enough evidence to issue a warrant for Jack Unterweger's arrest. But there was a problem. He was no longer in Austria. When Unterweger realized the authorities were closing in, he did what he did best. He ran. He fled to Switzerland, then France, and eventually the United States, dragging his girlfriend along with him. He believed his international connections and charm could keep him safe. But the FBI had been alerted. Austrian police worked with Interpol and U.S. law enforcement, tracking his movements as he hopped from city to city, desperately trying to evade capture. While on the run, he gave interviews claiming his innocence. The very media he was using in his favor helped in his capture. A meeting was set up for an interview in exchange for a heavy amount. But the newspaper leaked information to the FBI. His luck ran out on February 27, 1992, in Miami, Florida. The FBI tracked him down with his girlfriend. The man who once fooled the world was now sitting in handcuffs, facing a mountain of evidence against him. But even in custody, Jack Unterweger still thought he could talk his way out of it. He had fooled them once. Why not again? Jack Unterweger's arrest in Miami was just the beginning. Austrian authorities wasted no time demanding his extradition, and after months of legal proceedings, he was finally sent back to Austria to face justice. On May 27, 1992, he arrived in Vienna, this time not as a celebrated writer, but as an accused serial killer. The trial began in 1994 and became one of the most high-profile criminal cases in Austria's history. The same media that once praised him as a rehabilitated man now exposed his deception. Prosecutors laid out the damning evidence. His movements matched the murders. His phone calls connected him to the victims. and the signature not used in the killings was the same one he had used decades earlier. Witnesses, forensic experts, and investigators tore apart his carefully crafted persona, revealing him for what he truly was. But Unterweger refused to admit guilt. He maintained his innocence, claiming he was a victim of a conspiracy, that the police wanted to frame him because of his past. The jury wasn't convinced. On June 29, 1994, after one of the longest trials in Austrian history, Jack Unterweger was found guilty of 9 murders and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But instead of facing his punishment, he had one final act of control left to play. Just hours after his conviction, on the night of June 29, 1994, prison guards found Unterweger dead in his cell. He had hanged himself using a rope made from his prison bedsheets. But in a final eerie twist, he had tied the knot in the same distinctive way he used to strangle his victims. Some saw it as a last act of defiance, a way to cheat the justice system one final time. Others believe it was the ultimate sign of his cowardice, unable to face the reality of his crimes. In the end, Jack Unterweger died the way he lived, wrapped in lies, deception, and the same twisted signature that defined his crimes. We all believe in second chances, in the idea that people can change, that rehabilitation is possible. But Jack Unterweger's story is a chilling reminder that some people don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. His case stands as a warning. Some crimes are too great to be forgiven, and some chances should never be given. What do you think? Should a convicted killer ever be trusted again? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching Prison Stories. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our videos.